So, Gerben, thank you very much for joining us in this first week of our MOOC Solid Science on research methods. We're very happy to have you. Maybe you could briefly introduce yourself to students.
Of course. My name is Gerben Moerman. I work here at the University of Amsterdam as a lecturer, mainly in research methodology. I teach both qualitative and quantitative methods, and I did my PhD as a PhD student on interviewing, qualitative interviewing. So I did a large-scale experiment using both qualitative as well as quantitative methods.
And you're in the sociology department, right?
I'm in the sociology department.
Okay, that's great. So we have a representative from sociology. That's good. Okay, so you watched the videos for the first week that focus on the scientific method, the principles behind science, and a bit of history and a bit of philosophy of science.
And I really enjoyed it.
You did?
I didn't.
Well, thank you.
I didn't expect. Well, I expected to enjoy it, but I didn't expect that you would focus so much on the history of philosophy of science, and I think that was a brilliant choice.
Okay, oh really? Well, thank you. We'll get to the history part in a bit, I'm sure. But first I'd like to ask you something about the first two videos that were more generally on what science is and how you gain knowledge in a scientific way, how science is different from gaining knowledge in day-to-day life. And I talked about the scientific principles of empirical testability, falsifiability, openness, transparency. But of course, I presented all these things in a sort of ideal fashion. This is the way science should work. But I'm interested in how you think science actually works. Do we adhere to these principles? What do you think?
Well, it is the way science should be done, and the good thing about it and about science is that we discuss a lot about this, because how you think it should be done, others might think a little bit different about it. So there's always a discussion about these principles. They're not set in stone or in anything else. I don't know the colloquialism. We discuss about it, and in general, when people are working, it is sometimes really hard. We do a science of human beings, and as the philosopher Schutz once said, a human being is not an atom. It reacts on other people, it reacts on a researcher. So all kinds of issues with objectivity and measurement and exact measurement, there are issues with it. And people understand the words you're using, you hope they understand the words you're using, but they give their own meaning to it, and their meaning might not be exactly the same meaning as your meaning. So when you do an interview, for instance, well, you bring ideas and you pose questions on friendship, for instance, and then someone uses a totally different meaning of friendship, such as a Facebook friend or whatever kind of friend. So we have to deal with that as researchers, and it's really hard to focus on all the principles all the time. So we need to juggle. It's hard work.
Okay, so I want to talk about the last two principles, openness and transparency, because it might not be entirely clear for people how researchers are open and transparent. So how do they exchange information? Could you explain a little bit about that?
I returned from a conference yesterday evening, and at those conferences there's a lot of openness and transparency because people present their research and discuss their research. We do things like peer review at such a conference. So someone is presenting and someone in the audience would say, well, why did you analyze it this way? Why didn't you use these methods? Why have you chosen for that design? And this is the forum of academics that discuss science. And there it's a live discussion at a conference. Because it's not only when people present, but also during lunch and evenings and etc. We keep on discussing. And
so basically a researcher's work is never done.
No, but we also do this in more formal ways through peer reviews in academic journals. So when someone wants to publish an article, many journals send it out to other academics anonymously. So the idea is that without status or anything, every article is checked, controlled by other researchers who think about it, who sometimes give advice and sometimes simply say, well, this research is crap, you shouldn't publish it. And then if it's published, afterwards people react on it. At least that's what you hope when you write an article, that other people will read it and say, he's right or he's wrong. So we have this discussion there, and this openness and transparency. You not only see that in conferences and journals, but more and more you see this in web pages that scientists make, blogs. The dissemination of material, sharing of data, is luckily or happily.
I'll take it.
Okay. I'm really happy, that's the way to say it, I'm really happy that those ways of disseminating material, opening up the whole process of interpretation, the whole process of analysis, the whole process of the research itself, towards other science.
Of course, there have been recently some very high-profile fraud cases. How do you think fraud and questionable research practices figure into this open access movement? Or actually how they've affected social and behavioral sciences in general? Can you tell me a bit about that?
Well, the openness also has a flip side, another side of the coin, and that is that we deal often with very personal information. So sharing this personal information is against most of our ethics. So if you do an interview with someone, he or she tells something very personal, you're not going to publish that on the web. Right. At least I hope. So it's not as simple as just be open always. But, and that's the but about the fraud, in the past we have been thinking too much about, okay, we should protect everyone and not sharing information. So people that wanted to do some fraud could hide between that argument, behind that argument. They could say, well, I cannot give you the information because it's all private, etc. Or people simply didn't share it because, well, no one asked for it, and now we are going to ask for it, and people have to well, prove that it is privacy, private information, or that there are good reasons not to share data or share interpretation or share steps. And also there are other ways being thought of, also at this university, of how can we share it, at least among a peer group of researchers. So if you've done an interview with or research observation or whatever about something private, I will have access to it as part of a research community. So that I can check and maybe share some thoughts on it. So I think that's a good way of doing science. There are many issues to the fraud, of course. We have the sloppy science, you spoke about it a lot. And sometimes scientists are sloppy, sometimes by accident, sometimes people know it. Things get really difficult when scientists forget one of the main important aspects of science for me, and that is they forget to have some doubt.
I like that.
And when you're too sure as a scientist, you'll end up thinking, well, I know how this world works. I do not need to focus so much on the methods or focus so much on sharing data or focus so much on doing proper analysis because I know the answers already. It doesn't really matter. And that's what also happened in the fraud cases. They knew their theory was right, so they didn't care about it at first, and then the slippery slope of sloppy science.
I like that. The slippery slope of sloppy science.
The slippery slope of sloppy science ended up in fraud, and ended up not doing experiments, or even in the case of bugs, not checking not checking things such as a genocide. He spoke about the genocide somewhere.
Maybe you could briefly explain the Bucks case, what it was all about.
Yeah, well, the Bucks case was Bucks did research in former Yugoslavia during the war, and he started out doing a research as an anthropologist, and he started out doing this research focusing on religious aspects and Maria sightings and interesting stuff like that. But then the war came, and in times of war, it's really hard to do research, obviously. And well, what happened was that people told him there had been mass killings going on, and he himself later has said that, well, he didn't check it properly. Others said he invented it. So, but in the end, he published about a genocide that never occurred. 900 people or something, or 600, but lots of people were killed, and many were wounded, but they weren't. And that is sloppy science or fraud. Yeah. And after reading the report, I would say it's the last bit, because even after he knew that it was wrong, he published about it. So.
But do you think this is really due to a lack of doubt? Is that the real cause?
It's a lack of doubt, because, well, you've heard it, so I've heard it, so he told me, so why do I need to check it anyway? Or I have this theory, and as we saw with some social psychology experiments, and I know the theory is right, because I'm always right, or whatever reason. So I know the theory is right, so I'm just going to do the experiment, and I say, well, this experiment worked, because my hypothesis was confirmed. And we should remember, and that's why the philosophy of science is so important, we should remember that we're not sure yet.
Yeah, that's basically what science is about. We're never sure.
Yeah. And, well, you spoke about Popper, and the students have seen it, so.
It's interesting that you say that. I remember reading somewhere, I don't know who said this, I can look this up and post the link, but a researcher was confronted with the following question. I see that you change your mind a lot, that you change your hypotheses and your theories. What's up with that? And then this guy said, well, that's usually what I do when I find out I'm wrong. I change my mind and I find a better hypothesis. What's your solution if you're wrong? Right? So that describes that it's okay to doubt, and some people tend to forget that.
We're human beings. Again, we're not atoms moving around, yeah, exactly. No billiard balls, but we're human beings, so we have some politics, we have personal opinions about loving cats or something else. So they creep in, and we have to take care for that and think about it and reflect about it and be transparent about it, or try to be as transparent as possible.
Yeah, my hope is that people are going to wake up because of all this negative attention, all this fraud and these questionable research practices, that they're going to realize that doubt is okay.
Well, all scientists are in some way frauds, because every scientist knows that somewhere something might be not superbly done, and what we should do is be open about it. But also when we present something at a conference, it's 15 minutes. So you have 15 minutes to present your results. You can't tell the audience everything. So you have to select. And what do you select? On what basis do you select it? And that is, I think, really interesting, because what goal do you have with such a presentation leads to a certain kind of approach in that presentation. And it's exactly the same in articles or in books. There's politics and status going on. Yeah.
Let's go back to the principles, the basic principles that we started out with. Actually, some people might say that there's one missing, parsimony. A lot of people put this as a principle in the list, but other people think it's more of a quality criterion. I'm very interested to hear what you think.
So I'm going to fill up the gaps.
Yes, you're going to fill up my gap.
It's a difficult one.
Criteria.
It's a difficult one in discussing. Is it a quality criteria? Is it a is it a principle, or has it also something to do with aesthetics?
Okay, but maybe you can explain what parsimony is for our students.
Well, parsimony is the idea that a simple explanation might be a better explanation than a very complex explanation using all kinds of assumptions and other reasoning, and in this situation something will happen like this and this and this, but if that is going on then something else will also happen. And very often that is what's happening in real life, but since I think it's 11th century, Occam, there is some principle or aesthetics in science that the best explanations, the best hypotheses are not that nuanced, but are rather simple. And so for many scientists, there's a beauty in parsimony. For me, there's a beauty in parsimony, because it's the simplicity.
Yeah, a simple rule that explains as many phenomena as possible. That's beautiful.
Yes. But why is there a doubt that this is a central principle? Because we're dealing with a social world around us that is very complex, that is not so simple. And we've seen many beautiful, simple explanation that in the end didn't work. I think we see this in science more general, that the parsimony is still, if you have two explanations and they're equally well, then pick the parsimonious one. But check whether they work equally well. Yeah. Sometimes economic models, in economic modeling, you see this parsimony.
You lose explanatory power. Yeah.
Sometimes you lose some power, and in much of the qualitative research, it is focused on context. Well, you can't do parsimony on context, so sometimes you need loads and loads and loads of details in order to explain how there's some constellation in which something occurs. Why does someone becomes radicalized in it would be nice if it's really simple, but often it's not. Our science is complex, and well, people think.
Yeah, and react
and react. If I push you over, you will act on it, and you will act on it by giving meaning to me pushing you over. Yeah. That's a strange example, but okay.
Okay, so let's move on to the history part of the videos. There were quite some videos on the history of the scientific method. Now, I know why I think it's important to have that information in there, but you said at the start that you really liked that I put that in. So could you explain why you liked it?
Because often in methods courses, we focus on the methods. This is how you should do it, or this is how. But by including the philosophy of science, you show that we're discussing this.
It's in progress.
It's in progress, and and sometimes we're going a wrong direction for many years or for decades even, and then in the end someone comes up with a new idea or says, no, let's go back to Aristotle or someone else and then rethink this. And many of our ideas aren't really new. If you delve into history a bit, you see that, oh, I thought that was really brilliant of that author, but it's...
Yeah, exactly, like gross test and the first Bacon. They were already working on experimentation way before people like the second Francis Bacon and Galileo. Sure, yeah.
Augustine, the Saint Augustine, he thought of many smart things about interpretation, for instance, that we discuss nowadays again.
Okay, so the last couple of videos were on really the philosophy of science, epistemology, ontology. Why should researchers who are just, researching intelligence or social phenomena, why should they be aware of all these philosophical stances? What does it matter to them?
because it influences research. Even when you do not think about it, you are caught in an epistemological or ontological frame. So you see, you are looking at reality or a constructed reality, or you are thinking that you should learn something about society or human beings um, by measuring or by interpretation. So those are different approaches. So every scientist and everyone actually who is thinking about the world out there and trying to research a world out there has to think about, what is this world out there? And then the second question, the epistemological, how do I get knowledge about this? How? And that's what we discuss all the time, although we don't do that often on a philosophical level. We do this on we should measure it this way, or no, we should talk about it more and then see how what meaning people give. So between meaning making and measurement is a whole world, and there are epistemological influences, and they really come forward when you're working in a multidisciplinary team. So when you have someone in the team that is from a more measurement background and someone is more from an interpretation background, and it will clash, and it's an epistemological clash. Yeah. So it's good that you know about it. And
yeah, but with a different approach.
Yes.
Of course, but you're going to be doing your very own MOOC on qualitative research methods, the next in this course on research methods and statistics. So maybe it's a good idea to stop here and leave you some of your own material for your own MOOC. I really appreciate it that you took the time to come and join us. Thank you very much.